Three, two, one. Welcome to the final chapter of our Reading of the Lost Ark series, aka a crossover between the projection booth and the Culture Cast. I'm one of your hosts, Mike White, though you may know me as Lawrence Kasdan. Joining me, of course, is Mr. George Lucas himself, aka Chris Stashew.
It's like poetry, it rhymes.
And of course, Steven Spielberg, aka Andrew Rausch.
Hey, what's up? This is Steven Spielberg.
Wow, it's like he was in the room.
That's right.
Mr. Spielberg, I've got many questions for you.
I shall answer them all.
We are wrapping things up with the discussion of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny.
Retiring.
Well, in that case, what are we drinking?
Same for the goddaughter.
Dad told me you found something on a train during the war. A dial that could change the course of history.
Why are you chasing the thing that drove your father crazy? Don't move.
We need to get out of here. Stop! Sorry.
Helena! Dr. Jones, get him. Hitler made mistakes, and with this, I will correct them all. You stole it. Then you stole it.
And then I stole it. It's called capitalism.
This way!
Fasten your seatbelts. There might be some turbulence.
You've taken your chances, made your mistakes, and now a final triumph.
Give him hell, Indiana Jones! A few times in my life, I've seen things. I've been tortured with voodoo. Been shot 9 times, including once by your father.
Sorry!
But I've been looking for this all my life.
This film has all of these folks credited as writers. Jez and John Butterworth, David Koepp, and James Mangold, who also directed the film. Mangold has a real knack for looking at older characters at the end of the run, as he's almost doing for Indiana Jones what he did for Logan. This film tells the tale of Indiana Jones finding an artifact that may change the course of history, but that's kind of always his thing. We're going to be spoiling the heck out of this movie. So if you don't want anything ruined, turn off the podcast and come back. Don't be like the jackass who posted spoilers on my Twitter feed the day the movie opened. So let's go ahead and start at the beginning and work our way through this thing. And we've got our extended James Bond type opening with the de-aged Harrison Ford. And Chris, I think you're a big fan of the de-aging process.
You know, if you want to make your movie feel like a Marvel, there's a really easy way to do it. Step 1, de-age an actor. In this case, Harrison Ford, because, thankfully, we just watched Blade Runner 2049, no de-aging there. The reluctance of Harrison Ford to come back is felt not only in the role, but also in his appearance. Here, I'm assuming he was reluctant to come back, maybe not. He seems to be enjoying himself on this kind of last hurrah with Indiana Jones, but we kind of knew it was coming. There had been kind of whispers of like there was someone wearing an Indiana Jones mask, riding a motorcycle at one point, like a young Harrison Ford mask. And then, again, like we've seen this technology in the Marvel movies so much now that it's kind of commonplace. I mean, the Grand Moff Tarkin thing in Rogue One being another case, but that's also a Disney thing. It's just never been this prolonged and pronounced. And again, I felt like the character that Malcolm McDowell plays in The Clockwork Orange. It's like holding my eyes open, because with Grand Moff Tarkin, you can look away and it's like a minute. With this, it's like, what am I going to do? Go get a bucket of popcorn for 30 fucking minutes? Like, again, the action and everything else aside, just, I didn't want to look at it because it's not it's varying degrees of quality, but most of it is below what I would consider to be worth showing, at least for 25 minutes.
Andy, what did you think?
So I'm going to be the odd man out here. It wasn't as bad as I thought it could have been. There were times I thought it looked really good. The eyes that's the bad part. The eyes always look dead, but they look funky. But, I thought it was better used than The Irishman. I was one of the people that didn't hate The Irishman, but they still walked around like old people. I thought that this was one thing that they did better by using, in the action scenes, using a body double at a distance and not having an 81-year-old man hobbling around on top of a speeding train. I don't know. I didn't hate it. It was a lot more than I had expected. I mean, it was a lot, but I don't know. I mean, it wasn't one of the parts of the movie that I hated the most. And I know a lot of people do, but hey, I'm fucking Steven Spielberg. I can do what I want. And it didn't bother me that much.
Is there like a Robert Downey Jr. and Tropic Thunder thing here? Like, I'm not breaking character until we're fucking
I'm not breaking character. That's right.
You mentioned that they used a body double. There are a couple shots where they clearly didn't, and it's old Harrison Ford. And you mentioned the body double, and the voice is the other thing. Like, it is him doing old man Indiana Jones in a young body. Like, Disney, hire somebody to help with voice modulation or get an impersonator or something. Because if you're trying to sell 44, you're not successful in that regard. And they put in all this other effort to do it. It seems kind of strange to just be like, well, nobody can do Indy's voice other than Harrison. And it's like, other than all the times in video games that he did it, like, why? I don't know. Like, it feels like a video game enough. Why not just go whole hog? It seems a little strange.
I didn't mind it either in certain places, but when there's a lot of action, like when he's swinging around on the rope by his neck and stuff, I was just like, oh yeah. Or when they flash a light in his face at one point, I was like, that just doesn't look right. The way that the skin looked or something just looked a little wrong. I mean, we weren't living in the uncanny valley, but there were a lot of things where I was like, oh, okay. But the thing that I did enjoy, and I don't know if they de-aged Mads Mikkelsen, but if they did, it wasn't very pronounced. And Mads Mikkelsen, not as old as Harrison Ford.
Well, he almost looked like the same fucking guy. He almost looked like the same fucking guy, but with shitty blonde hair. Like, that was, well, I don't know.
The real problem for me, and I know I'm jumping ahead, is I would think he gets half of his head caved in by that thing.
How does he not have a giant scar? I thought there's a long scar when we first see him and they're talking to him when he comes back, right? Like, there's a long scene where he's got his head turned, and I thought he's going to turn and we're going to see this, crazy scar, like, the guy in Raiders of the Lost Ark, or there's going to be something, and it's nothing. It was he just looked like the same fucking guy.
Yeah, he's Mads Mikkelsen with gray hair and a few wrinkles. And yeah, same glasses.
He's a Superman. They talked about the Hitler wanted the Nazi Superman. Maybe he was one of them. I don't know, but it was weird.
Yeah, the super soldier serum. Right. That's why he recovered so quickly.
That's right.
Yeah, I like that they threw us a bone, us being the three of us here, by talking about the Spear of Longinus and having the original MacGuffin that George and Phil were talking about all those years ago. And I also like that they determined it was a fake right away.
Right away.
I have to say the dial of
right.
And I'm not going to try to pronounce. Whereas, I know I have at least two atheists on this call. So the Spear of Longinus, who knows if that was really a thing? Who knows if Jesus was a real person? All this kind of stuff. But all the mythology that goes along with the spear, all the stuff that goes along with the ark, with the cup, the Holy Grail,
right?
And then the Shankara stones. Nobody other than Molaram, nobody really wanted those for much of anything. And then Molaram, what's he want? He's just like, oh, when we get all these, we have power. And I'm like, okay, great. But this is a real item. We're playing with real history here, which is just an odd turn for Indiana Jones, because so many of his adventures mix science with mythology, and now it's like pure science, but then taking the pure science of the dial and making that into a mythological thing with time travel.
Right. Hey, I do want to throw one thing in here. You mentioned that about atheists. I really am Jesus. I'm Steven Spielberg. That's how I do what I do. So, and I want to throw in, when I make E.T. 2, we're going to de-age E.T. So I just want to throw that in there. And so, hey, I mean, why didn't anybody figure this out before? I'm fucking Jesus. All right. So go ahead. Sorry.
Can I mention, because you mentioned James Mangold already. But before we get further into this movie, I want to just ask just a general question. Does this movie suffer from not being directed by Steven Spielberg?
Well, I think Steven would say yes.
Of course it would. God damn it. Of course it would.
Okay. Not addressing you, Andy, as Steven Spielberg, but you as Andy. I mean, does this movie suffer from not having the Spielbergian touch to it?
I don't know. I don't know if he's got that same touch now. I think he does really good with big, grandiose movies now. But I don't know if an action movie is really going to be his forte anymore. I don't know. Thoughts, Mr. White?
I don't know if it would have made a difference. For me, so much of the movie is about the script. And, obviously we talked for 6 hours about the script when it came to Raiders, and just all that tinkering, all the stuff that went into it, all the things that were good, all the things that were bad, all the things that got pulled out into other things. And there's, of course, as I'm watching this movie, I keep thinking about our script conversation and just like looking for little things that they might have still kind of kept alive after all these years. Yeah, I don't know if it really would have mattered had it been Steven Spielberg in the director's chair, or if it would have been better if it was Lawrence Kasdan behind the typewriter.
The one thing that I think might have been different, though, was the editing, because it felt like this film, even though it wasn't like super flabby, I felt like there was some flab to it. And I can't say specifically, it was just in the second half. And I don't want to go into that, but it's just just yet. But it didn't feel streamlined enough. There was a point later on in the movie where, I'd have been looking at my watch if I'd have had one. I mean, it wasn't bad. It didn't feel long, but and even though we were getting a lot of action, I can't say what it was, but it felt draggy a little in the final third. So if I had been there, if Steven Spielberg had been there, I think I'd have had a little more control in the editing bay and would have been smoother.
Well, and it wasn't Michael Kahn. It was 3 editors. It was Andrew Buckland, Michael McCusker, and Dick Westervelt. 3 editors for this.
I think the problem was not enough editors and not enough screenwriters. You know what I mean? And also, why didn't we have 9 directors? If we're going to have 9 people at every other job, why not 9 directors? We could have had a big committee of fucking directors.
Could have had Spielberg and Mangold and Lucas, all of them. We could
have all been there. And Frank Marshall could have come on in and, done his, arachnophobia thing. We could have had it.
Pull out a Ouija board and get Bogdanovich on the horn. I mean, we could with the spiritual stylings of Peter Bogdanovich.
Right. We could have made it just like What's Up, Doc, or Last Picture Show. It would be great.
Yeah.
One thing that bothers me, if it's okay to throw this in there real quick, we were talking about the train scene, and that's where the de-aging. Do you know what I'm really, really sick of? And it was fun once upon a time, and maybe it would have been fun once in this movie. But the thing where he's ever on some speeding train, speeding car, speeding fucking anything, and his head is being held off, and then, oh my God, there's a big thing coming at his face, and then he moves his head, and we never think Indiana Jones is going to lose his head. It's never a real fear. But they did it, I think, about 4 times in this movie. That is fucking overkill.
Well, it's that and putting his head in a bag. His head is in a bag at least twice, if not 3 times in this movie.
Well, maybe they could have done that instead of the de-aging. Then you wouldn't have the complaints. He could have just had a bag on his head for 20 minutes.
I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that would have been a better option. I still know it's Indiana Jones.
Just cut out the eye holes, right?
What's that guy doing?
Is Mike frozen
I have
again?
to bring my mask.
Yeah, Mike. Just so you know, you're freezing a little bit as he's just fucking frozen.
Yeah, of course. I'll go ahead and I don't know why it says my internet connection's unstable, but it was fine before. For fuck's sake. With the thing with the motorcycle and the train, I was hoping they were going to do a super cop thing and have him shoot the motorcycle onto the train. It's like,
that would have been
we
cool.
Get so close to having big stunts in here, but then we don't. It's like we're in the age where we have seen so many of these spectacular stunts, whether they're done for real, like a Jackie Chan would do, or whether they're completely CGI. And I would say all of the stunts in here seem like they're very CGI, which is a little sad, And
right.
I will be honest, I kind of got fatigue from some of
That's
the
probably
action
it.
films because it was, yeah.
I kind of was not a fan of the action in this movie.
It seemed like overkill when it was happening. The chase scene went on and on and on, and then on some more, and then on and on. Like they would take a corner, zoom, zoom, in the little cart and shit. And then I felt like that was never going to end. And when I was watching John Wick 4 and he kept going up the fucking steps and back down and up, I thought that was going to hit in this way. But I mean, it was okay. It was workable. But this shit just kept going. And I thought the rest of this movie, like the next hour, is just going to be them driving around in this fucking car, going down streets and little alleys. Thankfully, that wasn't the case. It was only like a quarter of the next hour, but
yeah, I would have watched that movie. Just them driving in a circle.
And they just make a loop of that 15 minutes and it just
some Keystone Cop shit. I'd watch that.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, between the chase in New York with the horse versus the motorcycle in the car, and then the tuk-tuk chase, I was chased out. I was like, okay, in one he's chasing and the other he's being chased. I'm just like, okay, enough. And by the way, going back to that train fight, I kept thinking of Top Secret when the Nazi comes out of the smoke of the train and he's there and he's ready to fight Indiana Jones and there's a bridge that comes. I was just hoping that he would stand there and the bridge would collapse underneath,
right.
like would break around him.
I mean, it would have been more compelling than what we got. Because for me, look, the original 3 Indiana Jones movies are of a piece. They are their own thing. And
right.
I think that these 2 movies have more or less confirmed that those movies, 1 was obviously lightning in the bottle, 2 is my favorite, and 3 is the favorite of many. And it is the third one is very different than the first, and the second is very different than the third, but they all feel of a piece. 4 does not feel of a piece. It feels like its own thing. And 5 really feels like its own thing. And this opening is it sets that tone because it just lets you know, like, A, it's not going to be what you think. It's going to be like a flashback thing that everything does now anymore, where It's like, we're going to show you this thing that you didn't know about. We're going to retcon. It's kind of a retcon. It's a very lazy retcon, but it's a retcon nonetheless. Because again, now he had a goddaughter that's never been mentioned in all these 4 movies. Wouldn't be convenient if he had a son, and we'll talk about that.
Right.
But it sets the tone in a way that the openings of the other movies kind of did as well for their respective movies. I just think the tone of this movie is check your expectations at the door. This is not your mom and dad's Indiana Jones movie. This is very different. In a lot of ways, this is kind of what Rian Johnson was trying to do with that Star Wars movie. And varying degrees of success based on the person. But this in the very same way feels like I want to do my own thing that's not Spielberg with a character that is in the kind of pop culture pantheon. And Mangold does his own thing. That is for sure.
For me, the tonal stuff really becomes a challenge once we move to the present, once we move to July of 1969. No, it's not July. It's August of 1969. That's right. It really changes tone when we move to August of 69 and we get the Beatles music, we get him interacting with the hippies, we see the shithole apartment that he's living in, we get to see the picture of Marion, the divorce decree that we have going. So we're introduced to there's trouble in paradise type of thing. And then him going in, and of course, he has to be lecturing about Archimedes on that particular day. So yay us. So here's, oh my gosh. Yeah, we are just, we're putting in this exposition right here.
It happens to also be moon landing day. We have to go right for all of the iconic shit. And what are the odds of any of this, right? And I know it's, the last movie had UFOs in it, so who gives a shit? And this one has time travel. So I know we're not going for realism, but it just also happens to be the moon travel day. And the music that's loud that he's hearing is the Beatles. It just has to be something that's so iconic that we hear today and not one of the 800 groups they were listening to in 1969 that we no longer hear today. And it's just, or even the little shit, like where the picture of Marion is on the fridge, and this is the first day forever that he puts the sting on it, or does he do that every fucking day? I don't know, but it's just it just seems so convenient. And maybe this is a ridiculous bitch, but it's just I hate that. That feels lazy to me.
It's very lazy. even the thing with his retirement party that happens at this school.
This was the craziest day. Everything happened.
Yes.
And then how does he not notice, by the way, that his goddaughter is sitting there in his last lecture? He talks to her, but he doesn't know who she is, and he doesn't notice she's not one of his students.
Right. Nor does he notice the African-American lady that's sitting right next to her.
Right.
Who is she the first African-American woman that we've got?
I think.
All of these movies?
And she's an African-American Nazi? That's weird.
No, she's CIA.
Oh,
she
okay. But she was working for the Nazi guy, right?
Right, yeah. The whole thing is the CIA, very Project Paperclip.
And nothing against her and plenty against Nazis, but it just seems like somebody the Nazi would not have really dug working around, because they weren't real big on women or African-Americans or basically anyone that wasn't blonde-haired, blue-eyed.
I mean, the whole thing with the CIA working with former Nazis, it is very Project Paperclip, and they don't mention the Jet Propulsion Lab, but the whole idea of we're going to get all of these Nazi scientists. And it was ironic that I saw a trailer for Oppenheimer before this. I was like, we're going to get all these Nazi scientists to come on over here, help us out with their stuff, and yes, help put people on the moon. And Mads Mikkelsen is one of those guys. Somehow he turned from archaeology into a rocket scientist, I suppose, or maybe he was some Werner von Braun type person over in Nazi Germany. And for me, you're mentioning how Nazis wouldn't like having a woman, African-American woman around. The only time that Mads Mikkelsen comes off as a dick is when he is confronted with the African-American gentleman who brings in his lunch or his breakfast, and he starts questioning, like, where did you come from? No, I really mean your people. And he's just kind of being a real asshole about stuff. But for the rest of the movie, I'm like, I'd rather hang out with Mads Mikkelsen than I would most of the other characters in this film.
When he says, you fought for your country, didn't you, to the African-American guy? Did I miss something? Like, how did he know? Was that just a guess, or was he wearing a patch or something? Like, I didn't see anything. That seemed like a hell of a guess. Question. I don't know. It was just weird to me.
Maybe the Mentalist, too.
Right. Maybe he was a jack of all trades.
Now that you mentioned it, let's mention, I think one of the best things about this movie is they said, who can play a villain really well? Mads Mikkelsen, of course.
Right.
And like the best casting. I mean, one of the best casting choices was getting someone of his caliber in this movie. I think, unfortunately, he's not much of a villain because, I mean, again, he's a Nazi who was hired by NASA, helps the Apollo moon landing, and now he wants to go back and kill Hitler, which means that this movie is about Indiana Jones saving Hitler's life.
Yeah, well, I think he wants to take over for Hitler. Like, if anything, I think he wants to kill Hitler so that he can become like the new Führer. Like, he sees all the mistakes that Hitler made, and he's just like, no, I could do it better. I know what those mistakes are.
Right.
Like, Hitler was too much of a pansy for him. He wants to be the ultimate Hitler.
Super mega Hitler.
There you go.
And, so again, like, yes, obviously Mads Mikkelsen probably not going to be much better than Hitler realistically, but it is ironic given how many times Indiana Jones has foiled the Nazis that now it's not as much about foiling the Nazis as foiling a Nazi. So, but Mads Mikkelsen is like the best part of this movie, like bar none. It's just, how can you make a movie with Indiana Jones and just focus on the villain? That's more the question. Like, you can't do that. So.
He's no Paul. He's no Belloc, though.
Right?
Like, I think Belloc, as the anti-Indiana Jones, was given a chance to do much. And most of the time, it's just him swooping in, taking one part of the dial, swooping in, taking the other part of the dial, swooping in, doing whatever he needs to do. And just, he doesn't seem to have very many problems. And he's got Boyd Holbrook and then Olivier Richter's there to help him out. And Boyd Holbrook, as soon as I saw him, I was like, oh, he and James Mangold must have really gotten along on Logan, because he's basically playing the exact same character, but without an electronic arm.
Well, and I was joking with you about it, but Boyd Holbrook is not the character that Billy Magnussen plays from No Time to Die, the most recent James Bond movie. But you could be confused by that because they're both just kind of blonde-haired, blue-eyed Sam Worthingtons or Sam Whitmores or Joel Kinnaman, like generic white guys. And they play villains. They play villain sidekicks really well. I kind of forgot that Boyd Holbrook was the main villain in Logan, but that movie really, it's just about Logan fighting himself. So
right.
that movie didn't even need a fucking villain. So kind of, I think it's funny. Boyd Holbrook is kind of not needed here either. Like, I mean, he's fine, but it's not like he doesn't add much, I don't think. I don't think they give him much to do, unfortunately, either.
At times, it seemed like there was too much shit going on.
Yes.
There were too many characters. There was too much shit going on. It could have been pared down a little.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you get the CIA chief with the bad knee or bad foot or whatever, and I'm just like, we're going to find out anything about this bad foot? Like, you want to give us one line of dialogue? Maybe he's been chasing Wombat, aka Fleabag, all around the place, and that's why he's got the. I'm sorry, I will say the person's real name, Phoebe Waller-Bridge. He's chasing Helena all over the place, and that's why he's got this bad foot. Maybe she did something to him at some point, and that's why he's really angry at her. But no, we don't know. And so yeah, you've got 5-6 people chasing down her at Indy's college, where he just happens to keep the dial in this storage room where it could easily have been stolen. I don't want to be this guy, but it really drives me crazy when you show a character shooting that lady in blue who works for the staff, shoot her in the hallway. She's there face down because he shot her in the back. He shoots, I guess, the head of the department. He falls down. And then later on, Indiana finds her over in a different hallway, different part of that, and on her back. And I was like, well, she didn't crawl past that head of there and then flip herself over on her back. I mean, and nobody should have moved the corpse. So why did she move? Why was the body move? Was this just a weird continuity thing? Or was there another scene missing? Because there are scenes that are in the trailer that aren't in the movie that we saw.
Oh, it feels like there's half of a movie on the cutting room floor.
The better half.
God. Well, that's the thing. I mean, we have this opening in New York, right? We see old Indiana Jones. He's got no shirt on. Great. Harrison Ford's getting to show off his physique. I'm glad. But you mentioned it already, Andy. It's like, since when did this franchise become Forrest Gump? All of a sudden, it's like he goes outside and they're doing this and it's Moon Day, motherfucker. And it's like, what the fuck is all of this? Like this, there was none of this before. Like when we had The Last Crusade, which is kind of what this feels like it's aping, when he's like, he goes to the book burning in Berlin, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
That made sense contextually, thematically, historically. Those things all make sense. Here it's like, why does it have to be today? Because the guy looking for the dial is the guy who put the Nazi who put the astronauts on the moon. Is like, that's why. And again, like, to your point, Mike, like that adds nothing. Him being NASA adds nothing, like, other than like Operation Paperclip, which they don't even mention. They just mention that. I mean, again, they're not going to mention Operation Paperclip by name, I guess, but they could, given we know that it's a thing. I mean, you don't have to call it that then, but that's what's going on. And that was the thing I was most excited about in the movie, was this idea of like drawing on reality, and they just don't do anything with it. They just go, well, it takes place on this day and this guy did this thing, but as to informing the decisions that he makes or anything else, it's all just kind of expository for no reason.
Well, and on top of that, they make it seem like the reason that doesn't even have to be there, though, is because they make it seem like Mads Mikkelsen is the only guy that was responsible for the rocketry. And going back just a minute here, when we were talking about the unneeded characters, the part about this that really irks me is the one character we actually want to see again, Sala, disappears. And it's like, it was kind of like that old, I think it was Hitchcock that said, if you show a gun in the first act, it has to go off in the third. Well, I mean, okay, Sala does show up in the third, but I thought he would show up. I thought, just in the nick of time, he would show up and save Indy, but isn't he gone until the end? Or
yes.
I thought for sure he was going to get Marion and they were going to save the day at the end of the film. He comes in as this Deus Ex Sala, smacking the guy in the face, punching him, the hippie in the face, where we find out about Mutt's death just through a random thing on the TV. Good thing I was paying attention to that. And they're just like, oh, and his son died in Vietnam or whatever. I mean,
I don't know. He returned. He died on the way to his home planet.
Oh God, yeah.
he was so Poochie, bro. I mean, but think back, because again, in preparation for this, I watched the first 4 begrudgingly on that 4th one, and don't forget, in that 4th one, Sean Connery, still alive at the time, dies off screen. Denholm Elliott, dead at the time, dies off screen. So his death makes sense in the way they handle it, but they killed off Sean Connery the exact same way, more or less ignominiously. And here's the thing. I mean, they set up the idea that, like, what would you do if you could go back in time and warn yourself? And it's like, I would warn my son to not go to Vietnam. Like, it's so fucking
ridiculous.
It's fucking strange. Because here's the thing. James Bond was what Spielberg wanted to direct, and he directed Indiana Jones instead, right? Would James Bond, who now, spoilers for No Time to Die, there is a child that may be James Bond's in that movie. Would James Bond let his child go into the Iraq War? No fucking way. In what universe would James Bond go, or Indiana Jones go, yes, you can join the Vietnam War? Like, it's it makes Indiana Jones seem like a really bad father in a really weird way, given that there was an entire movie about his interrelational problems with his own father, and 4 was kind of about that too. And then they're like, but he just went to Vietnam and died. The end. Like, why do he doesn't have to be there? Like, this is kind of a day in Indiana Jones's life, this movie. It's like, I don't know why we needed to even fucking address it, frankly.
Well, and why would he go back and try to talk Mutt out of enrolling in the armed services? Why doesn't he go back to when Marion found out that she was pregnant and actually be a father for this child who didn't have a father for years and years? Like, when he finds out that he has a kid, he's just like, whoa, why didn't you tell me? And he's kind of upset in that 4th one, if memory serves. Go ahead and go back and be the father that Henry Jones Sr. never was for you.
Apparently not. Apparently not.
The weird tonal thing about this movie is, like, Phoebe Waller-Bridge she's some sort of now mercenary, and she's always talking about, like, oh yeah, I've got all these gambling debts, and there was this prince here in Morocco who I was supposed to marry, and I left him at the altar, I sold the ring, yada yada. And she's just all like happy-go-lucky. It's like she's in one movie and Harrison Ford's in another movie, because she's there having a great time, like, oh, wouldn't it be great if you had a time machine? What would you do? And he's like, I'd go back and tell my son not to enroll.
Wait a second. There's a point in the movie where an actor who shouldn't be in this series, but is for 5 minutes, Antonio Banderas, gets murdered. And she's like, yeah, we got away. Isn't that awesome? He's like, my friend just got fucking murdered. It's like, this is something that would have been addressed in the writer's room. You're doing this on screen. Like, this makes this is like one of those Marvel joke moments where it's like a sincere moment brought to you by Marvel, also ruined with a joke by Marvel. It's like that, but worse, because like this is also fucked up and not funny. This movie is a tonal mess in a way that I was not expecting, because 4 is not a tonal mess. 4 is consistently bad.
The tone thing there is so weird. It'd be like if she made a joke about, maybe you'll get lucky when we go over there, and he says, I got my penis cut off. Like at the tone, it would just go from, it was so weird. Yes, the transition is so, even she's like, fuck, what the fuck just happened? After he says, my son died, blah, blah, blah. And then he turns and walks away. It is comical.
Yeah, you expect her to do the thing with the collar going, geez.
Right.
Tough crowd.
Well, there's other weird things in here, like that poor horse that he rides through the subway. And I'm just like, watch out for the third rail. But when he gets the horse back on another subway platform, jumps onto a train and takes off. And I have no idea how the fuck Boyd Holbrook knew which stop to be at. It made no sense whatsoever. But he gets on the train, and then he has to say a joke, right? And he says the joke to this here's another older African-American woman. He says a joke to her, like he puts the button on it. The button is so bad that I can't even remember what it was, because it was terrible. And I was just like, no, there should have been, like, I was waiting for No Ticket or something like that, because this movie also feels the need to call back to all of the other movies. And we've got mentions of the blood of Kali. We've got mentions of him being shot by his own father. There's just like all of these things, of course, Mutt in here, all of this stuff where you're like, okay, this is kind of weird. Like he's really cementing this in there were 4 other adventures before this adventure, whereas the Indiana Jones that we know would have had 1,000 adventures, but he feels very compelled to tell us about the 4, or at least 3 of the 4 that he's had before. It's almost as awkward as when they're in that big warehouse at the beginning of 4 and you hear the Ark theme and you know that the Ark of the Covenant is in this warehouse.
Weird.
So we've mentioned, and Phoebe Waller-Bridge did some script punching up on No Time to Die, the most recent Bond film. And I can't help but keep bringing it up because it is in a same way similar to what this movie is trying to do. This movie is the final story that Harrison Ford is doing as Indiana Jones. They've said they're not going to recast the role. They've said that this is the final Indiana Jones adventure with Harrison Ford playing Indiana Jones. Should they do something else with Phoebe Waller-Bridge? Cool, but that's not going to be Indiana Jones. It's going to be Wombat and Friends, whatever.
Wombat and that fucking kid
with a big ass mustache. This little boy has a mustache. Fuck, I don't even know. Like I was like, is this like Hervé Villechaize? Like it's just a dwarf? No, he's a little boy, but he's just got a fucking mustache. And he had a unibrow too. He was a hairy little guy.
He was.
Speaking of Hervé Villechaize and James Bond, but all that aside, the idea that this is a movie about the end of something, and we're paying lip service to things that have come before. In No Time to Die, I mean, again, this is not spoiling the movie; it's in the trailer. He drives the Aston Martin DB5, and that's the entire opening of the movie has to do with that car, which is the iconic car. And there's so many iconic things in James Bond, just like there are in Indiana Jones. They are parallel properties in a lot of ways. It's just Indiana Jones didn't make use of the fucking time the way James Bond has, because it's all about Harrison Ford playing Indiana Jones until it's not, and you can have Sean Patrick Flannery doing a halfway decent job as young Indiana Jones, and you've got all of that backlog. But No Time to Die is a much more successful ending of a story than this movie is, because while that movie has its problem, it understands that we have to be an entertaining movie while also ending the story. And this movie just feels more like it feels like you're with Indy on a train, just passing stops and getting to see them and wave at them as you conclude to the end of the line and you get off at the end of the movie. It's just, mention Temple of Doom and mention Mutt, which means you mentioned the 4th movie. It's like, to what end? There's nothing else. There's nothing coming from any of this. Like this is it. And so it falls very short of being even sentimental. It just kind of feels like they didn't know what to do, because this movie has been being kicked around for another 10 years since the last one.
I love Phoebe Waller-Bridge, but she did feel like she was in a different movie a lot of times. And it was like, she's got so much backstory that I'm like, okay, you're hitting me with all this stuff that really doesn't matter. Like adding that prince with the scimitar in the tuk-tuk chase just made it longer. And I'm like, I don't need that. I don't need there to be the 3rd group that's chasing and being chased. Just it's enough, because I can't remember if I said this time around or not, because we started re-recording, but the whole thing of between the horse chase and the tuk-tuk chase, I was just chased out. I was like,
the train chase at the beginning of the movie, technically.
Really, exactly, because he's going through all these and running away from the guys. But I was really kind of tired by all of this stuff that's going on. I'm just like, please take a break, have a discussion. Let's hear a little bit more about this. Okay, great. You got this little flashback. Okay, cool. Indy promises that he's going to destroy the dial. I don't think he ever keeps that promise, no matter what. Like, even by the end of the movie, I don't think that dial's destroyed. He takes it back with him. So, way to go for fucking Toby Jones. That poor guy. He's just, I don't know why he couldn't survive, but he dies off screen too.
Right.
And I don't understand his character. Like, his character, I was expecting more of him in the movie. It just seems like God, we should mention in the Toby Jones scene, we get to see another iteration of de-aged Indiana Jones.
Mm-hmm.
And this time it's older than last time, but younger than he is now. So it's like, it's a time that we, I guess, have never really seen in his life. And it may be worse than the opening of the movie, but at least it's like one scene. But
Right.
it stands out even more because he's in like a really well-lit room and he's like interacting directly with Toby Jones, and they have to keep showing them like next to one another.
Right.
It's like, oh my God, like guys, like it worked a little bit better in the opening just because he was just constantly moving and you
I
didn't
agree
have
with
to
that.
see it constantly well lit.
I agree with that. It did work better for me in the beginning. And real quick, on Wombat, if it's okay, I want to make 2 quick points. When she first showed up, I was thinking, please, God, don't let her be his gal pal for this movie. Like, I didn't want her to be a love interest. And I thought, this is a classy enough movie that hopefully they're not going to pair an 81-year-old with this hot 30-year-old. And I was so glad that did not become a thing. And so instead, yes, we got the weird, oh my God, he's got a goddaughter we've never heard once about. That's one. And then 2, I didn't buy her backstory that she goes from having this father that's really in love with these pieces to becoming a mercenary of these pieces. And also,
Right.
if she really did become that, if she knew where this giant piece was, and she the whole time, the one that she could really make the money on, why did she wait so long to go after it? Not that that really matters. It could happen, but it just seemed a little weird to me.
Well, it was so screenwriting 101 as well. When we see Teddy, the kid being introduced, and he's got all of the gauges and dials set out before him, and he's teaching himself how to fly while working security or something at this hotel. And I'm like, okay, well, that kid's going to be flying a plane anytime now.
Right.
And a plane that had a guy in it who didn't need to be there. I don't know why this guy who sleeps better than I ever could in my entire life wakes up after they go through the hole into, the past thousands of years. And he's just like, hey, what are you doing with my plane? I'm like, oh my God.
That guy slept for 1,000 years, but just backwards.
Right.
I don't know. It was shit.
That was so weird.
It was to make the one joke. It was all just to make the one joke of him going, you stole my plane. And then we go, oh my God, there's a guy there. And that was it. And it wasn't a funny joke.
It was
Like,
that's
listen, you were talking about the
hilarious.
button with the African-American woman in the subway. This was even shittier. And the line there was the train's faster was the shitty line in that one. But it's like, it's all just to make this dumb joke of the man sitting up, and that's it. There's nothing else. He doesn't knock the shit out of the little kid. He doesn't go, why are there, what is going on with all these warships?
Right.
Like, I hear there arrows coming through the door here. Like, it was so just really weird. I don't think it did with theirs, but it was just weird.
Well, even when it comes to the punchline of, I know a guy and he's got a great ship. And I'm like, okay, then you cut to the guy and he's got this really shitty ship. And I think at one point she just says, oh, I was expecting a different ship or something like that. I'm like, no, that was the joke, guys. Like he's got this really shitty ship that should have been the thing. And please, God, tell me why it wasn't Katanga. Why wasn't George Harris in this movie? I mean, I don't know. Is George Harris with us? But this should have been fucking get another actor and de-age him or age him up or something and make it fucking Katanga. Don't have it be Antonio Banderas in here for 5 fucking minutes. One of the biggest wastes of this man's time ever. I mean, he had more presence in the SpongeBob movies, Come on. It's like he's just here to die. And that's his only person. Him and that other guy, the other guy that's on the boat. Actually, the 2 other
You don't
guys
know
are
who
like,
he is.
first Red Shirt dies, and then Red Shirt 2 dies, and then Antonio Banderas is like, shit, I'm a Red Shirt too.
I went to the bathroom, and I never go to the bathroom. Maybe it's because I'm 50. Maybe it was because I'd been busy all day. I never go to the bathroom, but I ran. I was trying to get done really fast. I come back and fucking Antonio Banderas is on the screen. I thought I walked into the wrong theater. Like, where the hell did this guy come from? And why is he here if it's the right movie?
Hey, they never answer that because he has 2 lines? 2? What? 1? And there's a point where he's like gonna open his mouth and someone else cuts him off. And I was like, wait a second. Like, is that gonna be the joke that he doesn't have a line? It's Antonio Banderas was in one of the best movies of this year, that Puss in Boots Last Wish movie, which is fantastic. And he is like, why?
It was really distracting too to have a big name person there to play that little bitty role.
Right.
And then in what I saw, they didn't really, like I said, I peed, but it didn't really seem like, they had this long friendship here. And it's like, oh, that was my friend. Like, and he's all pissed about it. Like,
right.
He's an old friend, okay? He's an old friend. You've never heard of him. It's like Mike and Barney Miller. Hey, Mike. Hey, buddy. Hey, you remember when all those missions we had together? So fun. Like, it's the same thing they did with Phoebe Waller-Bridge. It's that same, like, you just have never heard of him. He was there all the time. He's, it was Agatha all along. It's that same shit. It's like very, it's just like Inspector. I am the author of all of your pain, James. Like, no, you're not. And the fact that they're trying to lazy chain it together is lazy. And again, like, oh, well, Phoebe Waller-Bridge is your goddaughter. Like, yeah, sure. I guess he's never mentioned he didn't have one at any point. So he didn't mention he did either. So, but yeah, like Antonio Banderas, man, like what a waste. What a shame.
And he's third billed. He must have one of the best agents in the world. And if you look at some of the posters, it's like he is bigger than Phoebe Waller-Bridge is on the posters. It's like Indiana Jones, Phoebe Waller-Bridge, Antonio Banderas, like way big in the, oh man. And then on the poster, because I successfully, until that motherfucker posted stuff on my Twitter, I had successfully avoided all spoilers for this movie. I hadn't seen any trailers for it. So when I saw the posters, I thought it was Pedro Pascal. And I'm just like, this is another Pedro Pascal thing. This guy's everywhere.
Well, and here's the other thing. So I didn't see his name billed because the theater that I went to, cocksuckers, I almost feel like I should tell it on here like an ad, started the movie early. So I walk in and I walked in and I was 2 minutes after the shit started rolling, right? So I don't even get one trailer. They're on the fucking train doing shit. So I didn't even get to see like I missed all of that. So I also apparently missed his name, which I'm okay with that. But the I would like to see.
I don't think they showed any names at the beginning. I think it was a very cold open. There was the Disney open. It was a Paramount open. It was Lucasfilm and Disney present, or the Lucasfilm icon. And then they went into the movie. They started with Indiana Jones with the bag over his head. And
that's where I came in. He already had the rope. They were putting the rope on his neck.
And that's when it says Disney and Lucasfilm, which was a weird credit to see. And then Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. So no names at the beginning, not until the end.
Yeah, and it feels like a Disney movie. It doesn't it feel like a Marvel movie? It's so weird to me because, again, I rewatched 4 and I don't want to be an apologist for 4, and I don't think anybody should because 4 is not a great movie. But at least 4 felt like an Indiana Jones movie. Like, at least it still had the DNA at the heart of it that made it an Indiana Jones movie. Yes, I didn't like where it went. And yes, where it went is so cuckoo bananas bullshit with the ancient aliens and stuff. And I think it's funny. I think it's funny how horseshit it is. Because again, that ancient astronaut theorists and all that stuff aside, but like this movie, it feels so like a Disney movie. And the fact that I saw it at the beginning, just like you mentioned, Disney 100 years of Disney, like, right, this is a Disney thing now. Like,
you know what's weird? So generally we're going back to 4 real quick. Generally, I would like aliens, right? Generally, I would like time travel. But somehow both of these movies have made that aspect kind of shitty. Like, I mean, look, there are aspects of the time travel here that was interesting, but somehow they made it kind of overall feel sucky. And that's how I felt with the aliens in 4. Like, how do you make Indiana Jones and aliens be so shitty? And they did it. I don't know. So these movies do have something in common and something to be impressed about. And it's the way that they ruined things that should have been more interesting.
Well, it kind of goes back to the thing that we're talking about with the weaponization of the MacGuffin. The Crystal Skull, I mean, did the Russians think that they were going to revive the aliens or join with the aliens and then have them attack America or something? Because there's no reason why the Russians should be interested in these aliens whatsoever. There's no, like, we will take apart the capitalist worldview with these aliens or something. If anything,
grants of knowledge. That's what it's supposed. It gave them like infinite knowledge, is what she got.
Okay.
But like,
and then it explodes.
Right. Be careful what you wish for. But again, like to your point, though, the Ark and the Holy Grail play into the climax in the movies in a way that makes sense because what they do has been established. and what the aliens do was never established. And what the dial does is established up until like 30 seconds before it happens. And then it's like Indiana Jones finds, oh shit. Oh no, he's the only one who realized. And it's like, fucking Christ movie. Here we go. Like all bets are off.
Doing? Do you know what he's doing? He's doing George Lucas in those story sessions that we read, where George is like, well, the sun would have shifted and the stars would have changed. So really, we can't use the sun to figure out where the Ark of the Covenant is because thousands of years have passed. And Indiana Jones becomes that guy. He starts saying, oh, you idiots, there's continental drift. Archimedes didn't know about that. We're going to go back to the wrong period.
Which is like so fucking hilarious.
Oh my God. And talk about last minute. It's like, once again, things you could have brought to my attention yesterday.
And like, I get why they do it when they do it, but it again comes back to this idea of you introduce so many characters and so many other things that we never really get to focus on like you mentioned, Andy, we never get to focus on the time travel. Just like in the fourth movie, we never really, we get to talk more about the aliens in the fourth movie than in this movie with the dial, but the dial in this movie is more of a MacGuffin than any of the other things were in the other movies. Because even in 2, the Shankara stones play into the way the movie concludes with Mola Ram, grabbing him and burning his hands and, freaking out and dying. But in this, it's just like, okay, sure. But we only ever see it do its thing one time, which I know the Ark and the Holy Grail are the same way. But in this, it's like, even that, it's just like, it just kind of happens. I don't know. It's very strange to me that this is what they went after all this time and all these other ideas and going to the Well of Aliens. This is still where they landed, is time travel. Fuck it. Is that not the last gasp of a dying franchise? Isn't that why they did it in Endgame? Is because that was the last time to do it then, and then you never have to do it again. Like, I just don't get it.
They should have time traveled back to when people gave more of a shit about these movies. That would have been helpful. Did you see the numbers on this movie? It's making the same numbers as The Flash.
Wow.
It's a bomb.
Who is this movie for, ultimately? Like, the fans of this movie are what? Like,
I don't know. I think they're, I don't know how old you are, Chris, but I think it's for me and Mike.
I'm in my early. I grew up with the first 3 movies. Like, I saw the fourth movie twice in theaters the day it came out. Like, I was overjoyed to be able to buy Indiana Jones merchandise in 2007, 2008, because there was none of that. Like, I had an Indiana Jones hat growing up, like that fucking fedora. I had the Temple of Doom poster in my room. Like, that's why it feels like, I know that South Park did that. It's their personal attack episode on Indiana Jones. But like, at this point, I wonder, like, who the fuck is this shit for? Cause like, I don't know if young kids are like, Indiana Jones, I'm a huge fan of that. Like,
so I'm glad, and you established your cred, and that's great for a 31-year-old. But I want to say that the majority of the fans are 40 and up, right? Like, you grew up with them, but I think Mike and I'm not, doesn't give a shit. I don't give a shit. But there are people in a different way that grew up with them, like Mike and I did, and people that are older than us. But it's like, even though you're an exception, and I'm really glad you're an exception, I don't think there's that many people under 40 that are super fucking amped to see another Indiana Jones movie. And I think that that's part of the problem. And the other part of the problem is a lot of the older audiences, hopefully older than Mike and I, are the people that just want to stream now because it's too much of a pain in the ass to go to the theater. So who is the audience? There is no audience. That's the problem. There's not really an audience. I think they're looking for a nostalgia that people don't seem to give enough of a shit about for that to really be there for many people other than us. I was amped. I bet you guys were amped. But my ampness left as the movie went on.
It's interesting, too, that you would think, now Phoebe Waller-Bridge is immensely talented. Mads Mikkelsen, wonderful. Antonio Banderas, fucking A. But kids are probably not that super thrilled for Harrison Ford. If anything, you would think you would want to put another big star in here to make it appeal more to the kids. It's not like a 25-year-old is going, oh man, I can't wait for that new Phoebe Waller-Bridge movie to open. That's going to be lit, or whatever the kids say these days. Oh man, I watched Fleabag all the way back in 2016, and that was so great,
I watched Little Mustache Boy with the fucking unibrow. I'm a big fan of him,
Yeah.
It's like,
But, what are you going to do? You got to put something or somebody else in here to make it appeal to a little bit more wider audience. And
I doubt many 20-year-olds are going, I can't wait to see an 81-year-old in an action movie.
Right.
And that's where the tonal disconnect comes from. Because Phoebe Waller-Bridge is in the movie that they should have made. And Indiana Jones, a la Harrison Ford, is in the movie that they couldn't help themselves but make because James Mangold made it. It's that like musing on life and age and growing older, and you're losing, because ultimately the climax of the movie comes down to, do you want to be out of time and admit you're out of time, or do you want to get with the times, motherfucker? And that's ultimately the question of the movie is, are you ever going to feel out of time, even if you're in, and again, whatever, fine. You want to go that route, movie, fine. James Mangold, go for it. But for me, it's like Indiana Jones is not that avenue. It should have just been a triumphant finish to a career and a character that so many people, like we've mentioned, though, many people that are not more of being made every day. To your point, this should have been a last hurrah for the people that were fans of this fucking franchise, not attempting to make something to kind of bridge the divide when you know that there's nothing to bridge. There's nothing else here. They're not doing anything else. And you were on the right track with Mads Mikkelsen. Everything else kind of fails. It's just everything else kind of fails, other than the fact that they got Jonathan Rhys-Davies back into the movie again, which I'm sure he would have come back for 4 willingly.
God, he looks like he's 5,000 years old. He looks like the mummy that they dug up. I mean, I feel bad, but as we could talk about Harrison Ford being 81, but God, he looks like he's 50 years older than Indiana. He looks bad.
Yeah.
I was glad to see him, but God, he looked so shitty. I almost wasn't sure it was him.
Going back to my screenwriting stuff that I was talking about before with the kid and the flying, one thing that never seems to pay off, and I've seen writers do backflips to try to make this pay off, is her forcing the card. And there have been writers that I've read over the last few days that are just like, oh, well, you get it. Her forcing that 7 of spades on everyone with the cards is like Archimedes forcing them to go back to the Battle of Syracuse with the dial. And I'm like, really? That's where you're going to go with this? That's what you're going to try to prove to me? To me, it just made no sense, because I was waiting for her to do another card trick or something later on in the film. I mean, she does a little thing with the dynamite sticking out of her back pocket, those kind of things, but nothing to do with cards. And then the other thing is that he's got those papers, which seem to disappear pretty quickly after that, where they have the dates of 8/20/69 all over the place. And I'm like, all right, well, first off, we know that an American had to write that. Otherwise, it would be 28/69. They don't seem to give a shit about that Toby Jones and Mads Mikkelsen are both from Europe. But anyway, we've got a date here, folks. 8/20/69. The ticker tape parade for the astronauts took place on 8/13/69. So we've got a ticking clock. Something's going to happen on 8/20/69. And they really never tie the thread that the gate is going to open on 8/20/69, that we have a ticking clock. We don't feel like we have a ticking clock with this movie.
We don't get the Nazis are going and digging at Tanis scene from the first movie, the scene with, it's the Ark, the Ark, and that whole thing with the specialist. There's none of that in this movie, and it needed that. If these are James Bond, which again they kind of are, then this movie doesn't have the scene that the other movies have had, which is the explanation of the thing. I will say I appreciate, as someone who played a lot of Indiana Jones video games, including the LucasArts point and clicks, I can't help but feel like the whole scene in the archives is a callback to the Fate of Atlantis video game, which would have made a much more compelling movie. Because again, it's just, for me, it's like you have to, I know that the dial is a real thing, but that kind of actually, it wasn't never the point of the other things. The Ark and the Holy Grail are maybe real things. And you've imbued them with what one could consider, and I would think a lot of people would agree, an understandable level of power associated with these biblical relics. In this, it's like, this could do whatever the fuck frankly. Like, it does. I'm not even sure they understand what the fuck they're trying to introduce. Because yes, Harrison Ford says, well, we can travel to a fissure in time, and this finds that fissure. But it seems like there's actually more going on, and they never kind of explain it, and they kind of just yada yada it, which of all the movies to yada yada, even in the fourth movie, Indiana Jones doesn't yada yada the explanation of what they're going after. It never does that. It takes a moment to do it. And this movie is just not as concerned as the other movies have been, which is kind of strange.
He's his own M in this one. When he's giving the lecture, that's as much backstory as we get. And I'll tell you, that whole thing with the Battle of Syracuse, when he's talking about those claw things that would grab the ships, and we see those kind of peripherally as the planes are flying way too low over this battle. Fucking pull up, man, or else you're going to get speared like they do. But anyway, they also talk about the mirrors and how they were setting fire to the ships with these mirrors. And I was like, yeah, I want to see that. I want to see like death laser beam from these mirrors, like that casino in Vegas that was cooking people by the pool because the windows were all set up incorrectly. It's like, yeah, I want to see that kind of stuff. No, we're not going to see that. We're going to see old Archimedes come out. We're going to see this Roman soldier get ganked. And apparently Archimedes died at that battle so that he isn't dead when Indiana leaves, allegedly, or however that happens, because he gets knocked out cold. I think that Roman who was coming after Indiana was the one that should have been killing Archimedes, and they're all worried about the sanctity of time. And I'm like, since when is Indiana Jones worried about the sanctity of time?
Well, I was convinced that the entire third act of this movie was going to be, he goes back in time. He's like, well, I'm going to leave a note for myself about my son. And like, right. and then in that kind of the coda, you have, well, Marion is back because like Mutt is still alive, to fucking see him. But it's like, well, I got a call from Mutt, or, answers the phone and it's Mutt, or, it's like, yeah, like Back to the Future. That would have been awesome. Right. Back to the Future wanted it one way and had its cake and then ate it too twice with the second and third movie. But even it understood that you can tease that whole don't mess up time. But if you mess up time for the positive, nobody cares. And that's the thing that they do in Endgame. It's like, yes, we fucked with the timeline, but guess what? We got ostensibly, quantitatively a better timeline out of it. So nobody cared. Right. And that should always be the way time travel is addressed in these movies. It's not, we can't fuck up time. It's, we can't make it worse. So do whatever you can to make it better. And yes, I get that that's where you kind of get the paradox of it, but at least that's more interesting than just doing this, well, I'm not going to stick around because I'll fuck up time thing. Because it's like, Jesus, what is this? The butterfly effect all over again? Like, it's so played out at this point.
Well, she's like, oh, there's not enough medicine and you've been shot and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, first off, he's walking around just fine after being shot. Of course, it's a shoulder wound, but I'm like, hey guys, don't forget Archimedes was also a physician. So, maybe you're in okay hands here. And if not, you die at home, you die here in ancient Greece. What do you want? So, but yeah, I totally thought that they would have had some sort of thing where either him or Phoebe Waller-Bridge make that trip and talk to Mutt, and he's there alive and we're good by the end of the film. Great. Marion comes back. They do the little kiss on the elbow thing, which was a nice throwback. I guess they do call back to Raiders with that. But yeah, I really wanted his son to be alive too. And they don't really, he like gives that speech about how, they broke apart after Mutt died and, that he's basically living as this bitter old man, but they don't really address that too much in this. I mean, other than just Harrison Ford being a bitter old man.
I felt like the ending is totally unearned, right?
Oh yeah.
Like what do we do here? Let's make everything perfect to this ridiculous amount. So we have Marion with the biggest bullshit appearance. Like she's there for 30 seconds. And Sala's like, oh, they all come in like, here's our happy family. And all of this shit happening at the very last 30 seconds or whatever. And it's like, oh, everything's happy. The police aren't even looking for him anymore. What has changed that? Like, I don't understand.
Thank
that,
you.
It really pissed me off. Like, and there, no one goes, well, we have to lay low until we figure out, did they figure out the whole situation with the cops and clear him while he was asleep? It was awful. I'm sorry, the ending was awful. I thought that the 20 minutes leading up to it was awful, but then it got there and I thought, I still missed it up, I'm not going to lie, about him and Marion, but I thought it was an awful scene.
Well, when they played Marion's theme, that's when it got me, because I was just like, oh, that music, that love affair that they had. And, remember when she was 12 and he was 22?
Right.
Thank you. Hey, it's not weird, though. We promise. Okay. Steven Spielberg, he's here with us now, and he said it's fine.
He wasn't grooming her. It wasn't none of that. It wasn't like an Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis thing at all.
They were married. They had kids in the end. Come on.
It's all
What's
good.
the problem? Yeah.
That's the American way.
It was like someone. It was like someone saw Return of the King and they were like, "How can we make this like that but dumb?"
Right.
Well, again, it has that same feeling because if you think about Return of the King, Frodo drops and it's like, "What happened? Where am I?" And you have to come to the realization of what's happening with the character. You don't see the character coming to. You come to with the character. And in this, it's so bizarre because they go back in time in an Indiana Jones movie to a time that has nothing to do with anything other than continental drift. And it's like, okay, sure. And there's a bunch of Nazis and we get to see Mads Mikkelsen in a straight up Nazi outfit, which is a wild piece of imagery. I will say to my wife's credit, she mentioned, and I think we should mention here, Mads Mikkelsen doesn't look remotely German at all, even when they put him in a Nazi outfit. But what an ignominious way to end an interesting character. It feels like they really had I know that there were mentions of rewrites of the third act of this movie, and that's the only explanation.
It feels like they improvised the whole movie.
Right. Thank you. And then they get to the third act and it's like, what happens? So he goes back in time and their plane crashes and they die. And they meet Archimedes, and then, does he stay or not? And they're like, his last movie, and maybe. And it's like, just make a fucking decision here. And they make a decision, and then they don't let the character get the decision that they made. They go, the character's going to make a decision, bop, Deus Ex fist to the fucking face. And it's like, and that is a better way of doing this than actually earning your ending.
Well, I was just going to say, I love that when they get there, Archimedes, they just happen to be right the fuck where Archimedes is walking around, one. But the other thing was I wrong on this? I felt like there was an implication that, and it's that trope thing where Archimedes doesn't realize that he's going to make this thing until he sees theirs. But if I like that kind of trope. But the problem here is if he died at that battle, how would that have ever happened? I mean, even if it's changed now, if in the original timeline, he wouldn't have known until that. How would that even be possible? The other thing is we talk about how no one seems to know exactly how the dial works, but he looks at it and instantly knows. I don't know. It was fascinating to me, that aspect. The whole movie just seems really sloppy. Some of it I had fun with its sloppiness.
Go ahead, Mike. Sorry.
Your wife brought up a really good point. My wife was also bringing up when he goes to the airport, she's like, wait, aren't the cops looking for him for murder? And then when they're doing the whole map with the dot stuff later on, she raises up her hand in the theater and does the fingers mean the money thing. And she's like, where did they get all the money to pay for these trips? And I was like, yeah, that's a really good point.
Because he lives in a hovel.
Right. It's not like he's got a money belt when he leaves the house. He has no idea he's going to be going on an adventure at this point.
Sala gave him some money.
Oh, okay. Indy, my friend.
Here is some gold.
So I want to compare a couple things. Let's compare the scene of the kind of the tomb raiding, because we get a little bit of tomb raiding in this movie. We got some in the fourth movie as well when they're looking for the tomb of whoever has the skull buried under his chest and the thing with the tilting plate. It's actually kind of fun. The third movie, I guess you could consider the third act the tomb raiding thing, or the part with
a little in Venice as well.
Right, the thing with the rats, and then the thing in the palace in Indy 2, and then the Well of Souls thing. This is so, for me, this was the best part of the movie because it was kind of the most Indiana Jones of the things that we see, and you don't have to have Harrison Ford doing a lot in these scenes compared to him rolling around on top of a fucking train or jumping out of an airplane with parachutes, all sorts of things that Timothy Dalton was doing in Living Daylights, and now Indiana Jones is doing it in this movie. But The thing that I will say, though, because the tomb raiding scene has the thing that you mentioned, Andy, in it. They're like, oh, my God, the sarcophagus. It has an eagle with propellers on it.
Right.
And I'm like, oh, no, it's doing that thing that so many time travel things do where it's like, wait, he has the watch on his arm. That's Jürgen Voller's watch. And it's like, oh, no. So they're going to travel back in time. The movie is like telegraphing what it's going to do 20 minutes before it does it. And it's just, I don't know. It takes the wind out of what ends up happening, because what ends up, like, if you don't spoil it, it actually is kind of interesting. But if you tell the audience what's about to happen, like with characters going, look at this thing, it has propellers like an airplane. You don't
I
have
thought it was some low budget looking tomb raiding too, because until they get to the actual room where the coffin is, like, you've got this 10 minutes of them going through this really narrow space that looked like it could have been a sound set or something, like a sound stage, and it looks like shit. And then all of a sudden, and I don't know, it's
a vertical wall they're climbing up.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden there's like, the fucking bugs on them and shit. Like, I don't know. It just, and they were only in that one area. Like, I thought this is a perfect place for a snake, not a bullshit, eel. Like they use eels. Oh, he looks like a snake. But no, I mean, because that's the indie thing, right? Like, we're going to have a snake reference. No, there's no snakes in there. There's really nothing worth a shit until you get there. And then, I don't know. It just, that was my thing, is I thought this looks really low budget. This particular scene, everything else is overdone with CGI and shit for no particular reason. But this, it looked like shit to me. I don't know.
If anything, I thought they were going to do an homage to the first 3 films and do, here's a room with bugs, here's a room with rats,
right,
and here's a room with snakes. Like, and when they went into the one room and they're like, oh, all this methane, which seems to bother Phoebe Waller-Bridge, but doesn't seem to bother Harrison
No,
Ford
he's just
whatsoever.
like, it's good. He's a Terminator.
Doesn't even like put a scarf over his face, nothing. He's just like, yeah. He doesn't cough. She's coughing her head off. And eventually he's like, oh, this guy was all into water displacement. And I'm like, oh yeah, Eureka. And I thought that was really funny when he says Eureka when he sees the thing.
My 81-year-old body is immune to methane. Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I'll let you finish that. But it's just like, whatever, dude.
But I thought they were going to do this homage and stuff. And then, of course, no. And then apparently, like, you can see stills from the trailer. There's a giant stone ball that they find at one point that I think Phoebe Waller-Bridge releases, and I was just like, okay, yeah, I think they were going for more of an homage to the earlier films, and they trimmed it down to be just the bugs, which look terrible. They all look like CGI bugs now, and I'm like, no, they were probably half real in Temple of Doom.
I think, unfortunately, James Bond and Mission Impossible and a lot of other action franchises, have gone the correct route, which is focusing on doing things practically. I mean, look, Tom Cruise is doing a lot of his own stunts. Daniel Craig did a lot of his own stunts in those Bond movies. But, who didn't do a lot of their own stunts in those Bond movies was Roger Moore late in his tenure in A View to a Kill, where it's every shot of a person doing something is a body double or a stuntman, and then close-up shots of him being James Bond are just him, Roger Moore. And this is what this felt like. It has that weird disconnect. In Lord of the Rings, which we've kind of already mentioned, Peter Jackson is the god of making disparate things that shouldn't work, like the fact that they're filming with small actors, using masks, using forced perspective, all of those things in multiple times. They're using multiple things in multiple scenes, and it all works together, and it never looks cheap or shoddily put together. And here, to your point, Andy, everything looks really shoddily put together and cheap. And they spent like $300 million on this movie. And I just don't understand, if your actor can't do things, why do you do this thing again that requires him to do things? Why not have him be, again, I'm not advocating for this, but why not have just killed him off like they did with Han Solo, and have that be half of the movie is then them coming to terms with the death of Indiana Jones and avenging his death? Because then you free up a lot of space and room to actually do things believably, as opposed to doing a lot of the things in CGI. And again, like all those other action franchises that I mentioned, they are really committed to doing things practically, and it shows. It really shows. And Indiana Jones 1, 2, and 3 really were committed to it, because again, they also came before a time where it was as prevalent as it is now. But now it just feels like a facsimile of something that we grew up loving, just with all of the love and fun kind of drained out of it, and not in the way that 4 was just goofy and dumb. This movie just feels kind of decisions being made by committee, which I think is like a Marvel movie or a Star Wars movie at this point.
I think that Lara Croft really ate Indiana Jones's lunch while he was away from the table, because I kept thinking of the 2 earlier Lara Croft movies and then the one that came out just a few years ago. And I was thinking that I liked the tomb raiding in those better than I liked the tomb raiding in this one. And a lot of the stuff in this felt derivative of things in those. And so I just was like, oh yeah, no, like I want to see more of the water displacement thing, all of the puzzles, all of those things that you need to do. Like, okay, great, there's a crescent up on the rock, so let's go up here rather than go through this entrance. But then once you get inside those caves, it gets really confusing, and there's no sense of geography. I have no idea how long they're traveling, that the bad guys can show up wherever they want to. As far as I know, they don't have teleportation powers, but it definitely feels that way. The death of that one giant guy seems really horrific to me, that the kid handcuffs him to the gate underground and drowns. I was kind of horrified by that. I would much rather have my villains get their faces chopped off by propeller blades or get shot in the heart or something. My God, that was really morbid.
Well, and the weaponization of the MacGuffin is, there isn't any, because it's a time travel device, like the Holy Grail allows Julian Glover to quickly age, and like, oh, okay, right. Like makes perfect sense. Like, and the thing with Cate Blanchett, she gets so much knowledge that her brain can't contain it and her head explodes. Like, makes sense. In this, it's what the Romans
crashes.
Yeah. And there's Mads Mikkelsen, just like his head on a rock, like with his face burned. It's so unfulfilling. Like, look, here's the thing. In another role that Mads Mikkelsen had, where he played a villain in Casino Royale, you could almost compare how he's treated there and here simultaneously, because that has a rather anticlimactic end to his character in that movie. But I wouldn't consider that death ignominious.
No,
I would consider in this movie the villain's death is so ignominious. It's like, why was he even in this? Because ultimately, this movie has the biggest criticism that can be leveled against it is, remember in Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indiana Jones didn't do anything, the Nazis would have killed themselves. Well, yes and no, but the Nazis would have still had the Ark. So yeah, someone needed to be there to take it away. In this, it's like, if he had just let them be, they would have gone through time, ate shit, and then what?
Yeah.
Like, he didn't need to be there at all this time, is what I'm getting at.
And I just kept thinking of other time travel movies. I can't remember. I don't think, Chris, you were on the Tomorrow I'll Wake Up and Scald Myself with Tea episode, where it's 3 basically ex-Nazis that are living in Rio, hire a plane or hire a time travel machine, and they want to go back and give Hitler a nuclear bomb near the end of the war, when things have taken a bad turn for Hitler. And at one point they go back and they think that they're in 1 year, but they're actually in another year. And I'm just like, yeah, that was a much better movie than what I'm watching here with Mads Mikkelsen suddenly revealing his plan here of, I'm going to go back and out Hitler. The other one that I kept thinking of is a movie that I liked up until the very end of it, which was Days of Future Past, the X-Men movie, where when Logan wakes up at the end, everything seems to be normal and good and all this. And I'm just like, wait, no, things have changed. Like, things that you were doing have changed where we're at. Like, everything's good now. Like, everything's fine. And that was totally the end of this movie, where he just wakes up and it's like, oh, everybody's good now. All right. But Mutt's still dead.
And ultimately, like, I cannot believe that the climax of this movie is decided against the character's wishes. In a way, like, Indiana Jones dying in the past, it could have worked. Like, I think it could have, as much as I don't want to see Indiana Jones die. Like, he's effectively dead as a character anyways, because they're not doing anything else. So right. Yes, he survived in the final closing minutes of his story, but to what end? Like, again, even ostensibly, if you were like, well, Indiana Jones in 2023 is long fucking dead. That's what he is, because he would be like 100 something now. So, and that's the problem ultimately with all these movies, is they had to set it in 69 because Harrison Ford is I don't say unforeseeably old, but he's so old that you can't cover up how old he is anymore. Like when 4 came out, it's like, he looks 70.
Grizzled.
Yeah, he's 70, but he looks late 50s, early 60s, because again, he's an actor and he takes good care of himself like he can. But here it's like the guy is so old that we can't cover up the fact that he's old, which means the action has to be what it ends up being. And because of that, we have a movie that's its climax is like, I want to stay in the past. No, you don't. Bang, the end.
Right. Yeah, I really would have liked to have had more of a conversation rather than them just yelling in ancient Greek to this befuddled Archimedes. And of course, I keep thinking of Socrates from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure too. And I'm waiting for, weird dust in the wind.
I would have preferred that. Again, it's just, it has, for a time travel movie, because this now is an Indiana Jones movie that's time travel, it wastes every opportunity to do anything with it other than the one thing. It does, and again, it's the stacked deck. Okay, that's really boring. Like, yeah, I get that it's kind of a trope now that the thing can only do it once. Right. I mean, again, the Ark, the Grail, the stones, the skull, but you want to do something different? Don't do that then. Do something else. Like have them fucking with the time travel thing and him going back and forward in time over and over again. Like if you're going to do a de-aged Indiana Jones anyways, why not just go full fucking hog? I just don't understand. Or have him interact with his younger self. Again, I don't get why they passed up all these opportunities given what the budget of this movie is. Because guys, this movie's budget is like $300 million. Right. It's one of the most expensive movies ever made.
Well, what's crazy to me, and I was actually just going to say that something about that budget. When we talk about the better time travel movies, which is most of them, their budgets were so much smaller. And what's crazy to me is there was a time when we thought, Batman for $50 million was an outrageous budget. Now we're looking at $300 million. And you have to account for, the time and stuff. But you look at different kinds of movies. But I was thinking of this, like movies like The Godfather, when you're going way back, but it's still proportionally nowhere close to what $300 million would have been, or even something like Pulp Fiction, which was like $7 million. Today, proportionally, still nowhere close to $300 million. Those are better movies. And the point I wanted to make that I thought was interesting, and it's always been that way, is that great filmmakers have to find ways to work around a budget, right? If you only have so much money, you have to find a way to make that budget work. And it seems like a lot of times they have to come up with more creative things to make that work. And in the opposite way, it seems like when you have $300 million, your creativity seems to go right out the window. And it's been that way with most of these gigantic budget movies. It's interesting to me because it's like, here's money. We don't need any intelligent anything. We'll rely on CGI everything. I don't know. It's just, it was just a thought I had, though, that it seems like so many great movies are made with no budget, and these movies suck for $300 million.
You think like Time Crimes, which cost probably $200,
right?
Something.
Absolutely.
It is one of the best time travel movies ever.
And what's crazy to me is, even something like Endgame, right? Okay, so the budget of Endgame was $356 million. I could actually see where the budget of that movie went. I'm not even sure where the budget of this movie went. $300 million for what?
Well, and I was wondering, does the $300 million, does that include they had to have there was a massive advertising campaign. Does that include in the $300 million? Because at least I could see where that went. It didn't help, but I can see where that went. But nothing in the movie other than a ridiculous amount of CGI speaks $300 million to me. Mm-hmm. And it's not for acting, because most of these actors, they're not $300 million actors. I mean, who's your biggest actor is going to be Harrison Ford. I mean, come on.
And they're not shooting on location. I mean, the New York stuff is definitely just all the lot kind of stuff. I mean, and the camera is set up, I think, exactly the same place for both when he walks out to go to work and then also when Sala walks out with the kids to go get ice cream.
I think so.
I'm just like, okay, that's what we're doing. We're just going to shoot this from the exact same thing. We just have a lockdown camera, probably shot them one right after the other. But man, oh man, it just seemed so cheap in so many ways. And
did somebody walk around with walk out with $100 million in their pocket? This is
maybe
the budget of 4, again, 2008. The budget of 4 was 185 million. Like, what the fuck is going on? I genuinely don't understand, because like, to learn, I didn't realize going into the movie that it was such an expensive movie. And frankly, now it makes me kind of more perturbed at this movie, because for this movie to be $300 million, there should be more. There should be more things the action should have been good. The action should have been compelling. Anything should have been compelling. Because the only things that are compelling, I guess, are what? Harrison Ford doing Indiana Jones one more time in a version of Indiana Jones we've never seen before. I don't get what the point of the movie ultimately is, because even at the end of the movie, they Looney Tunes themselves out of existence. And it's like, what is this the end, or is there more to come? Like, I just don't understand, because you said there's no more, but
that's
yet
stupid. Yeah, the hat being pulled off the line.
Yeah, like Porky Pig.
I was surprised there
Looney
wasn't.
Tunes.
Yeah, I was surprised there wasn't a whoop noise.
Goodbye, folks. Like, and then he speeds off into the distance. Like, I just don't understand. Like, who was this for? And whoever it was for, did they enjoy it? And I just, the amount of people that saw this movie feels like.
Was it just for James Mangold? I mean, really?
I don't imagine James Mangold had a good time on this movie. I just have a feeling that he didn't have a nice time, because he was probably answering to a lot of executives on this.
Right. That's what it feels like. Like, the third act of this movie is the worst offender, but it feels like a film by committee. They were like, well, maybe James Mangold and David Koepp and some of the other folks fought for Harrison Ford to stay in the past. Maybe they fought for it. Maybe they fought what I would consider to be the good fight if you're making this kind of movie and you're addressing this kind of thing, which is he wants to be part of the past. He spent his entire life chasing the past, and now he can be there, which is like a thing that almost seems impossible in the context of this. Time travel feels almost like a bridge too far, but yet he's there and he's in the past. So why go all the way and not give him that? Like,
that would have been almost poetic. It really would have. At the time, I was like, don't end this way. And then when we ended with what we ended with, I was thinking, no, go back and end with that.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you have this opportunity to say, well, I've ruined my life where I live now, and my only option is maybe to go back and live a life somewhere else, and maybe leave a note for my future self. And like, there you go. And, you could then have a Phoebe Waller-Bridge epilogue where in the future, Mutt is still alive or something. And that's where that inroad is, where it's like, Indiana Jones sacrificed himself so Mutt could live type thing.
And it doesn't even have to be life. You could interject in there, I've ruined this series where I live now, and maybe I could go back. I mean, that would have been... Was that a bridge too far? I'm sorry.
I honestly don't think that James Mangold really gets Indiana Jones. Like, he was talking about the whole idea of the Archimedes dial thing, and he's talking about like, oh yeah, I came up with that before we even did this because of time, and it's really about Indy getting old and blah blah blah. And I'm like, okay, yeah, that's good. That all makes sense. I'm with you there. But then he talked about how the Ark of the Covenant, that was a test of Indiana's faith, that he didn't believe in any sort of spiritualism, that it was a bunch of hocus pocus to him. And I know he talks a little bit about hocus pocus, but when he brings up the Ark of the Covenant to those army guys, you can see the excitement in his face. He 100% believes that there is an Ark. It's not like he doesn't believe in this thing. And the way he's just like, didn't you guys ever go to Sunday school? I mean, when they're talking about Tanis, he's just like, oh, Tanis, he's just so excited about it. I don't think that he was testing his faith in that movie. I think that James Mangold is totally off base with that.
I think, to me, this movie smacks of, again, to go back to James Bond, this smacks of what Sam Mendes tried to do with Skyfall and Spectre, where it's like, we're going to have a musing on the character of James Bond and what really drives him. Who is he as a man? And what does he do? And what? It's like, I just want to be this guy for once. I don't fucking give a shit if he's going to cook breakfast for himself, if he's going to eat a waffle or a pancake. I give a shit about what adventure he's going on, because that's the way this... I get that we want to have a musing on the finale of a character, and you want to have Phoebe Waller-Bridge calling him a tomb raider and a grave robber and whatever. Fine, you're going to do that, but you don't have to. You could just make a movie that is in the vein of the other movies, that were in the vein of other things intentionally, that weren't trying to be some musing on faith or other bullshit. They were just action movies. And for once, I want to be that guy to just go, they were just fucking action movies. And that's why we loved them. Not because they were some introspective anything. And then they try to do this and it's like, man, see what I mean? Like, it just doesn't really work.
When you did that Sam Mendes voice, I was thinking, I really wish he had been with us also. When we did the George Lucas and all these guys, because that would have been kind of, he sounded like he had it going on, man.
Yeah, he understands the Bond character, okay? His brother, you see, we're going to introduce a brother character. That's the dark James Bond. Cool. It's just like, you don't understand what people love about the character. And because you don't understand, you inject your own beliefs and ideas into it, which is fine, but that's not a hollow void. There are things there already that you're kind of believing aren't there and pushing out of the way for your own stuff. And then you're surprised when the fans and people that love these series that have been around for 30, 40 years go, I'm not a big fan of this. Like, it's just a little too much.
I mean, and I think Mangold's a darn good director. I really love what he did with Logan. So I think a lot of that comes from the Scott Frank script, if memory serves. But I mean, Jez Butterworth, his brother, John Henry, they're really pretty solid writers as well. David Koepp, I have some issues with here and there. Not always liking everything that he's done, though he's done some great stuff. But man, oh man, just for me, my final thought is thinking about Indiana with the whip in this. The scene where they're doing the auction and he brings out the whip and he's whipping around and everybody is, freaking out. And then they all pull out guns. That's where there needs to be a punchline. And there really is no punchline. Like, the punchline, I guess, is maybe the pulling out of the guns, but there needs to be something else after that. And all that happens is they just fall to the ground. Like, he and Phoebe Waller-Bridge just duck down. I'm like, that's it. That's your solution to stuff. As they're shooting all their guns, you're just going to duck down in here. So,
and it worked.
But that's not the way to end that scene.
That was a nuke the fridge. Hey, I did real quick. Can I hit on one thing? It's very short since I know we're wrapping up. You know what I thought was one of maybe it didn't affect you guys this way, but I was giddy in one little part, and it was on the fucking train. But there was one part that I thought was fun moving back that I forgot to mention and no one else mentioned. The part when that big gun on top of the train gets stuck and it just keeps firing and the train is going around the bend and it's just picking off Nazi one by one by one. I thought that was awesome. Now, if anything else in the movie had been as fun as that, I would love this movie. But anyway, I just thought that was great.
That was a really good thing. And the sound of the gun sounded really good.
Oh, yeah, it was great.
Yeah, and seeing all those Nazis being picked off, because
it's always fun to watch Nazis get killed. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, always. I ain't going to lie.
I almost wondered.
This is a pro-Nazi punching podcast.
So I was going to make the joke. I almost wondered if the reason that this movie is flopping at the box office is because there are now so many Nazi sympathizers, and they knew that the Nazis were not going to win. Therefore, they did not want to go. But that is only a theory. Just like the card game thing, it's just a theory.
There are movie fans on both sides.
Good people on both sides.
Good people on both sides, but not really.
Andy, do you want to give your final thoughts first, or should I?
Mixed bag. I wanted it to be better. I liked some of it. Probably I was a little bit of a stan in that, I talked about the beginning part. It didn't really bother me that much. But like I said, my enthusiasm for the movie, I came in with it super high. I was going to accept a lot as long as it didn't take place in the fridge. But it got more and more into the fridge as it went. I don't know. I lost my enthusiasm, and the last third was mostly boring for me.
So thankfully, this is the last time that we ever have to talk about Indiana Jones. And I say thankfully only because the final movie, I think I don't think it did anything better or worse than 4 in terms of leaving the character in a spot that's interesting. I think 4 was a little bit more of a resounding success in the terms of how we left the character of Indiana Jones and the journey he goes on. He finds out that he's a dad. He finds out that he has a son that's kind of an ass like he is. He reunites with Marion and he saves the day. And, John Hurt's along for the ride. And by the end of this movie, sure, I guess Sala and Marion are there and they went for ice cream and who the fuck knows, frankly. And, I as an Indiana Jones fan who remembers when he was too short to go on the ride at Disneyland when he was 6, who had a fedora, who wanted to be an archaeologist and had the Temple of Doom poster in his room for 12 years, essentially. This movie I can't believe it, but I fell asleep for like 2 or 3 minutes in this movie when they were underwater. Like, and I'm ashamed to admit it, but it for me kind of speaks to more where I came into this movie. After the 4th movie, I was so jaded that I was not excited for this movie. I was just hoping it wouldn't be an affront. And there are some parts that I enjoyed, but I think ultimately I'm glad this is the last time we have to talk about Indiana Jones. Yes. But I'm glad that the 3 of us got to talk about Raiders of the Lost Ark for 6 hours, which I think for me is what I will always think about when I think of this movie is the reading of the Lost Ark, as opposed to the Dial of Destiny ultimately being kind of the worst of all 5.
The best part of the movie was us getting to talk about it.
Yeah.
It was good seeing you guys again.
I'm not that huge of a fan of Last Crusade, but them riding off into the sunset was the way to end this whole franchise.
Yeah. Like that gives that hits me more emotionally than anything 4 or 5 ever did. And I think I read on The Ringer, they were like 4 and 5 are less sequels and more epilogues to the first 3. And yeah, but unneeded epilogues, unfortunately. And, you know, I refer to this Entertainment Weekly that I had as a kid in the late 90s, early 2000s, and it was all about sequels and things in development hell. And they talked about Indiana Jones 4. And to think that we now have Indiana Jones 5, if I could go back and tell myself then, like, you're not only going to get 4, but you're also going to get 5. Like, it's still crazy. I can't believe that it happened, but like, please stop with these sequels. We need to start understanding that the pop culture things that people used to get animated about don't do it for people anymore. And if you want to make money in this show business, you got to stop going back to the well, because I think it's dry.
You know what I think we should do, guys? We should all just take a vacation to a beach in Hawaii and start pitching ideas.
Yeah. All right. I got this guy. Hear me out. Indiana Smith.
Right.
They wouldn't let us make an Indiana Jones movie, so we're going to make our own character, Indiana Smith. All right.
What is the one, Cleveland Smith or whatever? The Sam Raimi thing.
Yeah.
Do you remember, Mike White, at the end of the 90s when we were going to do that book on the unproduced screenplays, and there were a shitload of Indiana Jones screenplays, which all got obviously crammed into the last movie before this, but I just thought of that. That was great. And at the time we were like, these are so weird ideas, you know, and now here we are. And I wish they'd maybe made those instead of these movies.
Yeah, I much rather would have had a monkey that has a peach pit that makes you immortal. That would have been pretty great.
I mean, again, I come back to the Indiana Jones video games that I played as a kid. Fate of Atlantis, fucking the other one, the one where it's like in China and it takes place right before Temple of Doom. Like, fuck, just don't do this. This I don't know. Like, you know what? The Mummy was the best Indiana Jones sequel. Fucking fight me on that one, guys. Come on.
You know how bad these are? Is it Atari? I'm going back here. Atari 2600 had the Raiders of the Lost Ark game, which was awful. I mean, it was terrible. And I played the shit out of that, and it was so bad. And yet it was better than these movies.
Oof. James Mangold. It's all good. It's all, yeah. You know what? E.T., this is like E.T. It's just like, there's a bridge too far. Just
go away. Indiana Jones, go away.
Thank you so much, Chris and Andrew, who have been with me on this incredibly long journey talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's taken a year almost for us to put this together, which is kind of wild. But thank you, Chris, for reminding me that there was a 5th Indiana Jones movie last year.
It's like, Mike, why are we doing this? What are you doing this for something, right? Like, no, okay.
You gave me purpose, Chris.
Thank you guys for putting up with me. I was late twice, I think, on this. Thank you guys both.
But we expect nothing less of Spielberg. I mean, the Spielbergian ego has to get in the way somehow.
I'm fashionably late, you know.
So Chris, what is happening with you lately, sir?
Not a whole lot, just not going to the movies, not seeing new movies, but talking about movies on the Culture Cast, which you can find over at weirdingwaymedia.com, along with the aforementioned reading of The Lost Ark on the Projection Booth RSS feed, or plenty of other things. Like Andy and I did an episode on Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas a couple months back, which was
awesome.
A fun one. So that's where you can find all the things that I work on, weirdingwaymedia.com.
And Andy, you always give me a run for my money when it comes to being busy. What is going on with you these days?
So I'll just cut it down to 3 books. I've got 2 that just came out. and one that's coming out. The two that just came out, one is a novel, which is a sequel to my novel Layla's Score, which is called Layla's Gone. But movie-wise, I just had the book on Watermelon Man come out. It's called Melvin Van Peebles' Watermelon Man. And the other thing is I have the oral history of The Room finally coming out in December. Very proud of both of those. Beyond that, I've got a couple books in the future that I'm working on for Applause Books, yay. And if I live long enough, they will get finished, and it will be great times for all of us.
It's pretty funny. In the editing that I was doing of reading of the Lost Ark sessions, we were talking so much about The Room because you were working on that book at the time. And I was just like,
it's a callback.
It was like half an hour, I think, discussing The Room and Tommy and all that stuff. And I was just like, holy cow, we were talking a lot about The Room. And then I remembered, oh yeah, Andy was right in the middle of writing that book.
I'd rather watch The Room than these two Indiana Jones movies.
I was thinking the same thing.
Well, thank you so much, guys, for being on the show. Thanks to everybody for listening. Again, if you want to hear more of me shooting off my mouth, check out some of the other shows that I work on, like Chris. They are all available on weirdingwaymedia.com. Thanks especially to our Patreon community. If you want to join the community, visit patreon.com/projection booth. Every donation we get helps the projection booth take over the world.